The eviction notice was a splash of angry red against the peeling beige paint of my apartment door, a final screaming testament to how thoroughly my life had capsized. It was the third one. The first I'd ripped down in a fit of optimistic denial. The second I'd hidden under a pile of nursing textbooks, as if not seeing it would make it disappear. This one, I just stared at, the blocky, unforgiving letters blurring through the film of exhaustion that coated my eyes. Final notice to vacate. The words were a death sentence for the meager life I'd cobbled together in this shoebox of a room. Cold seeped through my threadbare scrubs, a damp, persistent chill that had nothing to do with the late autumn air and everything to do with the hollow space where my next meal should have been. My stomach was a tight, aching knot of hunger and anxiety. I pushed the door open, the wood groaning in protest, and stepped into the gloom. The single window looked out onto a brick wall, and the only light came from the flickering street lamp below, casting long, skeletal shadows across the room. My gaze swept over the space that had been my sanctuary and my prison for the past year. A lumpy mattress on the floor, a stack of textbooks forming a makeshift nightstand, a tiny buzzing mini-fridge that was currently mocking me with its emptiness. Not a crumb, not a forgotten yogurt cup. Nothing. I had exactly $7.42 to my name, and rent was 2 weeks overdue. My landlord, Mr. Henderson, a man whose kindness evaporated the second a payment was a day late, had made it clear that there would be no more extensions. The thought of him, with his sour breath and predatory eyes, made my skin crawl. He'd suggested an alternative payment plan last week, a greasy insinuation that had sent me scurrying back into my apartment with the chain lock firmly engaged. But locks couldn't stop eviction notices. It was all Mark's fault. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. Mark, with his easy smile and promises of a future that was always just around the corner, just after this one big score. His big scores were poker games in smoky backrooms, and his promises were as empty as my refrigerator. He'd charmed his way into my life, my apartment, and my bank account. The student loan money I had so carefully budgeted, the meager savings I'd scraped together from 2 grueling jobs, one as a waitress, the other as a hospital orderly, had all vanished into the gaping maw of his gambling addiction. He'd sworn he'd pay it all back. He'd sworn it the day he disappeared, leaving nothing behind but a hastily scribbled note and a mountain of debt in my name. The loans he'd taken out, forging my signature with a skill that should have been criminal, were the anchor dragging me under. I sank onto the mattress, the springs digging into my spine. My phone buzzed on the floor, a text from my manager at the diner. "Alara, can you cover Sarah's shift tonight? Double time." A year ago, I would have jumped at the chance. Double time meant a little extra for groceries, maybe a new textbook. Now, it felt like trying to bail out the Titanic with a teaspoon. What was the point of earning money that would be instantly devoured by debts I could never hope to repay? I was drowning, and the frantic kicking was only making me sink faster. Despair was a thick, cloying blanket, threatening to suffocate me. I couldn't cry. I was too tired, too empty for tears. Then, a different kind of buzz vibrated through the floorboards. Music, faint but distinct. A deep, rhythmic bass line from the direction of the Grand Elysian Hotel, the glittering palace of glass and steel that loomed over our dilapidated neighborhood. Its golden light spilled into the sky, a beacon of a world so far removed from mine, it might as well have been on another planet. I remembered seeing the marquee earlier. "Congratulations, Amelia and David." A wedding, a big, lavish, obscenely expensive wedding, if the fleet of limousines I'd seen earlier was any indication. And weddings meant one thing: Food, mountains of it. Buffets groaning with shrimp cocktail and miniature quiches, carving stations with glistening prime rib, and a cake that probably cost more than my entire year's tuition. An idea, reckless and born of pure desperation, sparked in the darkness of my mind. It was insane. It was stupid. It was theft, technically. But the hunger clawing at my insides was more persuasive than my conscience. What was the worst that could happen? They'd kick me out. I was already being kicked out of my own home. The humiliation would be a small price to pay for a full stomach. And maybe, just maybe, I could find a quiet corner, an unlocked conference room, and sleep for a few hours in the warmth before I had to face the cold reality of my life again. Decision made, I stood up, a jolt of adrenaline cutting through my fatigue. I pulled off my scrubs, the fabric stiff with the hospital smells of antiseptic and quiet suffering. I rummaged through the small pile of clothes I owned, settling on my one good dress. It was a simple black sheath, a thrift store find that I'd bought for a nursing school function. It was clean, at least. I brushed my hair, trying to tame the frizzy halo that exhaustion had created, and applied a touch of lipstick, a cheap, waxy tube that was my only piece of makeup. Looking in the cracked sliver of mirror taped to the wall, I saw a stranger. Her eyes were too big, her face too pale and thin, but in the dim light, she might just pass for someone who belonged. A distant cousin of the bride, perhaps. A friend from college. Anyone but a starving, desperate girl on the verge of homelessness. Taking a deep breath, I slipped out of my apartment, leaving the red eviction notice to stand guard over the emptiness within. The lobby of the Grand Elysian was a symphony of opulence that made my head spin. A chandelier, the size of a small car, dripped crystals from the vaulted ceiling, scattering rainbow light across the polished marble floor. The air smelled of money, a clean, floral scent mixed with the faint, expensive tang of leather and perfume. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in glittering gowns drifted through the space, their laughter echoing like wind chimes. I felt like a stray cat that had wandered into a lion's den, my cheap dress suddenly feeling like sandpaper against my skin. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of turn back, turn back, turn back. But the scent of food, rich and savory, was pulling me forward like an invisible string. I followed it, keeping my head down and my shoulders hunched, trying to make myself as small and unnoticeable as possible. I found the ballroom easily enough. The doors were propped open, and the sounds of a live band and celebratory chatter spilled out. I peeked inside. It was everything I had imagined, and more. A sea of tables draped in white linen, a dance floor crowded with joyful couples, and along the far wall, a buffet that stretched into infinity. My stomach let out a pathetic, audible growl. I couldn't just walk in. I'd be spotted in a second. I needed a plan. My eyes scanned the lobby again, and I saw a group of servers carrying trays of champagne. Perfect. I intercepted one near a potted fern, plucking a flute from his tray with a murmured, "Thank you," and a smile I hoped looked confident. He didn't even glance at me. Armed with my liquid courage, I took a tentative sip. The bubbles fizzed on my tongue, sharp and cold. It tasted like starlight and possibility. My goal wasn't the main ballroom. Too risky. My new champagne-fueled plan was to find the bridal suite. Often, the wedding party had their own private catering, a quieter space away from the main chaos. Maybe I could slip in, grab a plate, and slip out. I checked the event board near the Praken. Elevators. Vanderbilt Hayes Wedding. Rose Ballroom and Suites. 12th floor. Excellent. I drained my champagne, the alcohol hitting my empty stomach with a warm, dizzying rush, and headed for the elevators, trying to project an air of someone who had every right to be there. The elevator was a mirrored jewel box, and I avoided looking at my own reflection. On the 12th floor, the hallway was carpeted in a plush, silent crimson. I could hear the muffled sounds of the party from the end of the hall, but my attention was drawn to the opposite direction, where a single set of double doors stood slightly ajar. The presidential suite, according to the gold plaque. It had to be the bridal suite. It was the grandest one on the floor. I crept closer, my worn-out flats making no sound. I peeked through the gap. The suite was dimly lit, vast, and most importantly, empty. A tray of half-eaten canapés and several empty glasses sat on a low coffee table. They must have all gone down to the reception. This was my chance. I slipped inside, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The door clicked softly shut behind me, plunging me into a world of hushed, extravagant silence. The suite was bigger than my entire apartment building floor. A sprawling living area with a white leather sofa, a grand piano in the corner, and a wall of windows, offering a breathtaking, godlike view of the city lights. I felt a pang of something bitter and sharp envy. To live like this, even for one night, was a fantasy I couldn't even conjure. I tiptoed over to the coffee table. My hands trembled as I picked up a tiny pastry filled with some kind of savory cream. I shoved it into my mouth, barely tasting it, then another and another. It was the most delicious thing I had ever eaten. After devouring the remaining canapés, a wave of profound, bone-deep exhaustion washed over me, amplified by the champagne and the sudden intake of food. The white leather sofa looked like a cloud. It was calling to me. Just for a minute, I told myself. I'll just rest my eyes for 1 minute, then I'll leave. I curled up on the end of the massive sofa, pulling a cashmere throw blanket over my legs. The leather was buttery soft against my cheek, and the blanket smelled faintly of cedar and something else, a clean, masculine scent that was strangely comforting. My eyes fluttered shut. 1 minute. That was all. A sound, low and sharp, sliced through the thick fog of sleep, the click of a key card in a lock. My eyes snapped open. Panic, cold and immediate, seized me. The suite was no longer empty. A man stood silhouetted against the light from the hallway, his frame filling the doorway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated an aura of absolute stillness that was more terrifying than any overt threat. He shut the door, and the room was plunged back into near darkness, lit only by the glittering cityscape outside. I held my breath, trying to will myself invisible, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. He moved into the room with a silent, fluid grace that was unnervingly predatory. He didn't turn on the lights. He seemed perfectly at home in the shadows. He walked to the bar, his back to me, and poured himself a drink. The clink of the heavy glass decanter against the tumbler was the only sound in the vast, silent room. I could see his reflection in the wall of windows, a severe, handsome face with a strong jaw and dark, watchful eyes. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, no tie, the top button of his stark white shirt undone. He looked nothing like a groom. He looked dangerous. He took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze fixed on the city below. I remained frozen on the couch, tangled in the cashmere blanket, my mind screaming at me to run, to explain, to do something. But fear had paralyzed me. This was not the bridal suite. I had made a terrible, catastrophic mistake. I had crashed the wrong party. I had stumbled into the wrong room. and I had the sinking, horrifying feeling that I had woken up in the cage of a lion who was not at all happy to find a mouse in his den. He turned, his movements economical and precise. His eyes, accustomed to the dark, found me instantly. They weren't surprised. They were assessing, cold, and utterly unreadable, a magnet pulling all the air and courage out of my lungs. He didn't speak. He just watched me, his head tilted slightly, like a hawk studying its prey. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken menace. I finally found my voice, a pathetic, reedy squeak. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, the words getting lost in the cavernous space. I thought this was. I was at the wedding. I must have the wrong room." He took another sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving my face. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the floor. It was like aged whiskey, smooth but with a powerful kick. "There is no wedding on this floor." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a correction of my pathetic lie. My blood ran cold. Of course there wasn't. The presidential suite would be on a private, secure floor. I was an idiot, a desperate, stupid idiot. I can go," I stammered, trying to untangle myself from the blanket. My movements felt clumsy and loud in the oppressive silence. "Stay where you are," he commanded. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of an iron decree. I froze instantly, my hands clutching the soft wool of the blanket. He walked slowly toward the couch, his footsteps silent on the thick rug. He stopped just a few feet away, looming over me. I had to crane my neck to look up at him. Up close, he was even more intimidating. A faint, jagged scar cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny imperfection on an otherwise flawless, severe face. His scent filled the air around me, that same smell from the blanket, cedar, and expensive cologne, but sharper, more potent now that the source was so close. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Alara. My name is Alara Vance," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "And what are you doing in my suite?" "Alara Vance." His gaze was intense, analytical. He was dissecting me, seeing every frayed nerve, every lie, every ounce of my desperation. I couldn't lie to this man. He would see right through it. The truth was my only option, as humiliating as it was. "I was hungry," I whispered, shame burning my cheeks. "The wedding downstairs. I was just going to take some food." I thought this suite was empty. I was tired, and I fell asleep. "I'm sorry. I'll leave right now. I won't cause any trouble." He continued to study me, his expression unchanging. A long, agonizing minute passed. I expected him to call security, to have me thrown out, arrested for trespassing. Instead, he reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a sleek black phone. He tapped the screen a few times, his thumb moving with deft precision. He didn't make a call. He was texting. My stomach plummeted. He was probably texting his head of security to come and deal with the trash he'd found on his sofa. To my utter astonishment, he turned and walked back to the bar, refilling his glass. He gestured with his head toward the tray of half-eaten food on the coffee table. "You call that food?" he said, his tone laced with something that might have been disdain or perhaps dark amusement. "You're still hungry." Again, not a question, a declaration. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. He looked back at his phone, then at me. "Food is coming. Don't move." I was trapped in a 5-star nightmare. Who was this man? He wasn't angry. He wasn't yelling. He was calm, controlled, and that was infinitely more terrifying. His command was absolute. I didn't dare disobey. I sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa as he settled into a large armchair opposite me, the window behind him framing his dark silhouette against the glittering city. He sipped his drink and watched me, the predator waiting patiently for what? I had no idea. Less than 10 minutes later, there was a soft knock at the door. The man didn't get up. He simply called out, "Come in." Another man entered, as impeccably dressed as the first, but with a more rigid, military bearing. He was built like a brick wall, and his face was a stony mask. He carried a large, insulated bag. "Leo," my captor greeted him, his voice flat. "Dante, the newcomer, Leo," replied with a respectful nod. He placed the bag on the table and began unpacking its contents with quiet efficiency. The aroma of hot food filled the room, making my stomach cramp with a fresh wave of hunger. There were containers of what looked like pasta, grilled chicken, a fresh salad, and warm bread. It was a feast. Leo set a plate and silverware in front of me on the coffee table. I stared at it, then up at the man named Dante. His expression was still unreadable. "Eat," he ordered, the single word leaving no room for argument. Hesitantly, I picked up the fork. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. Under the watchful eyes of these two imposing men, I began to eat. The food was divine, but every bite felt like a trap, every swallow a concession. I was a stray being fed by a man who might decide to snap my neck the moment I was done. I ate quickly, mechanically, desperate to finish and find out my fate. When I was done, Leo silently cleared the containers away. Dante hadn't moved from his chair. He hadn't touched his own food. He just watched me. Now that the immediate crisis of my hunger was sated, the full weight of my terrifying situation crashed down on me. I was in a hotel suite with a man named Dante who commanded others with a single word and had food delivered at midnight as if by magic. This was not a banker or a lawyer. This was something else. Something dangerous. "Leo," Dante said, his voice dropping even lower. "Tell me about Alara Vance." My fork clattered onto the empty plate. My blood turned to ice. He knew my name. I had told him, but the way he said it now, the way he asked his soldier-like companion to report on me, they had already looked me up. The text he'd sent earlier, it wasn't for food. It was an order. Find out who she is. Leo stood at attention, his eyes fixed on a point just over my head. He spoke in a clipped, dispassionate monotone. Alara Vance, 22 years old, second-year nursing student at City University, orphaned at 16, foster care system until 18, currently holds 2 part-time jobs. Address, 412 Elm Street, apartment 3B, 3 days from eviction. Significant personal debt, approximately $82,000, taken out in her name over the past 6 months. The loans are tied to a one Mark Renshaw, her former live-in boyfriend. Renshaw has a history of gambling arrests and is currently wanted for questioning in connection with a loan sharking operation in the East Docks. Every word was a hammer blow, laying the pathetic, broken pieces of my life bare on the expensive rug of this suite. I felt stripped naked, my deepest shames and fears exposed to these cold, indifferent strangers. I stared at Dante, my eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. How could they know all that? How could they find it out so fast? Dante's expression finally shifted. A flicker of something not pity, but something harder, something possessive entered his dark eyes. He leaned forward slightly. "Your boyfriend is a thief and a fool," he stated calmly. "He used you, and he put you in danger. The men he owes money to are not forgiving." My mind reeled. Loan sharks. Mark hadn't just been gambling away my student loans. He'd gotten involved with criminals, And now, they would come looking for their money. They would come looking for me. A new, more visceral fear eclipsed my terror of the man in front of me. The eviction, the hunger, they were survivable. But men like that. Dante seemed to read the panic on my face. He stood up, and the sheer force of his presence filled the room. He walked over to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the city that had been so indifferent to my suffering. "You have a choice, Alara Vance," he said, his voice a low murmur that still carried to every corner of the room. "You can walk out that door and return to your life. You can face your landlord, your creditors, and Mark Renshaw's associates on your own, or you can stay with me." I stared at his back, my mind struggling to process the offer. "Stay with you? I don't understand." He turned to face me, and for the first time, his eyes held a direct, burning intensity that made my breath catch. "It's very simple. You come with me tonight. You will live in my home. Your debt will be erased. Your education will be paid for. You will want for nothing. The men looking for Mark will be dealt with. He will never bother you again. You will be safe." It was a lifeline. It was a fairy tale bargain offered by a devil in a bespoke suit. But there was always a price. "And what do you want in return?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a chilling, humorless expression. "You," he said simply. "You will belong to me." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. It wasn't a proposition. It was a statement of acquisition. He was buying me, my safety, my future. He was solving all my problems. But the solution was a gilded cage. I looked from his hard, determined face to the silent, imposing form of Leo by the door. I thought of the eviction notice, of Mr. Henderson's leering smile, of the faceless, violent men Mark had indebted me to. My choices were a gutter full of sharks or a golden cage with a lion. Just then Dante's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression hardening. "The Petrovs are making a move on the port," he said to Leo, his voice sharp with command. "They're getting bold." He looked back at me, his decision made. "We're leaving. Now." He didn't wait for my answer. He had already assumed it. My things," I stammered, thinking of my textbooks, my few worn-out clothes. "They are irrelevant," Dante said dismissively. "Leo will retrieve anything truly necessary later. Everything else will be replaced." He held out a hand to me. It was not a gentle invitation. It was a summons. My heart pounded. This was it. The moment my life irrevocably split into a before and an after. I could refuse. I could run. But where would I run to? Back to an empty apartment I was about to be thrown out of? Into the arms of men who would break my legs for Mark's debts? I looked at his outstretched hand. It was large and strong, the hand of a man who built and broke things with equal ease. Taking it felt like signing a contract in blood. Slowly, hesitantly, I placed my trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and instantly possessive. He pulled me to my feet as if I weighed nothing. The contact sent a jolt, a strange and terrifying spark, through me. He didn't let go. He kept my hand in his as he led me toward the door, with Leo falling into step silently behind us. As we left the suite, I glanced back at the panoramic window. The city lights spread out below like a carpet of scattered jewels, beautiful and indifferent. I had come here tonight looking for a few scraps of food and a moment's peace. I was leaving with my life in the hands of a powerful, dangerous stranger who had just claimed me as his own. I had no idea who Dante was. Not really, but I knew one thing for certain. I had stumbled into the wrong room, and in doing so, I had just woken up in the middle of a life that was not my own. The elevator ride down was silent and suffocating. Dante stood beside me, his large frame radiating a contained energy that felt like a furnace. He still held my hand, his thumb stroking absently over my knuckles. It wasn't a comforting gesture. It was an act of branding, a constant reminder of his ownership. Leo stood opposite us, his gaze fixed forward, a stoic statue in a fine suit. I watched the floor numbers descend, each one taking me further away from the world I knew. Instead of exiting through the bustling main lobby, Leo guided us with a subtle touch on Dante's arm toward a service elevator at the end of a private corridor. The opulence of the hotel gave way to stark, utilitarian steel. The doors opened into a private underground garage, a cavernous concrete space that smelled of cold stone and exhaust fumes. Waiting for us was not a single car, but a fleet of them. 3 identical gleaming black SUVs, their engines humming in the silence. They were like sleek, predatory beasts waiting for their master. Men in dark suits, all with the same grim-faced, watchful demeanor as Leo, stood by each vehicle. They straightened as we approached, a silent, coordinated display of respect and readiness. This was not the world of business tycoons or celebrities. This was organized, disciplined, and utterly intimidating. This was the world of the mafia. The realization hit me not with a shock, but with a dull, terrifying certainty. The loan sharks Mark was involved with were small-time thugs. Dante was the king of the jungle. Leo opened the rear door of the center vehicle, and Dante guided me inside, sliding in beside me. The door closed with a heavy, solid thud, sealing us in a cocoon of black leather and silence. The interior was impossibly luxurious, but it felt like an armored transport. The windows were tinted so dark I could barely see out. The other 2 SUVs pulled into formation, one in front and one behind, as we sped out of the garage and into the city streets. We were a procession, a moving fortress. I stared out the window, watching the familiar, gritty streets of my neighborhood flash by. We passed my apartment building, a dark and shabby silhouette against the night sky. From this tinted window, it looked like a dollhouse, small and fragile. I thought of the eviction notice still taped to my door, a problem that now seemed laughably insignificant. My life, the one I had been fighting so hard to hold together, had been rendered obsolete in the space of a few hours. We drove for what felt like an eternity, leaving the city behind. The streetlights gave way to the dark, winding roads of the countryside. Eventually, we turned onto a long, private road, marked by a massive, wrought-iron gate that swung open silently as we approached. The driveway was lined with ancient oak trees, their branches forming a dark canopy overhead. And then I saw the house. It wasn't a house, it was a fortress. A sprawling modern mansion of dark stone and glass, built into the side of a hill overlooking the distant city. It was stark, beautiful, and utterly impenetrable. Lights glowed from within, but it projected an aura of profound isolation. This was Dante's kingdom, and I was its newest, most unwilling subject. The car pulled to a stop under a covered portico, and the door was opened for us. Dante led me inside, his hand now resting proprietorially on the small of my back. The interior was even more breathtaking than the hotel suite. A cavernous 2-story foyer with a floor of polished black marble stretched out before us. A minimalist floating staircase spiraled up to the 2nd floor. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, revealing the city lights twinkling in the valley below. The space was decorated with a sparse, masculine elegance modern art on the walls that I was sure cost a fortune. Sleek, low-profile furniture, and everywhere, the same sense of controlled, quiet power that emanated from Dante himself. It was beautiful, but it was not a home. It was a museum, a mausoleum, cold and silent and perfect. "Leo will show you to your room," Dante said, finally releasing me. His attention was already elsewhere, his phone back in his hand. The mention of the Petrovs at the port had shifted his focus. I was a problem he had solved, an acquisition he had secured. Now he was moving on to other business. "I have matters to attend to." He turned and walked away down a long corridor without a backward glance, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. I was left alone with Leo. His stony expression hadn't changed. "This way, Miss Vance," he said, his voice polite, but devoid of warmth. He led me up the floating staircase. Our footsteps were silent on the stone treads. He opened a door at the end of a long hallway and gestured for me to enter. The room was immense, larger than my entire apartment. It was furnished in soft shades of cream and gray, with a king-sized bed that looked big enough to sleep, a family of 4, and another wall of floor-to-ceiling windows with the same stunning view of the city. A door on one side led to a walk-in closet, and another to an en-suite bathroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury spa. The closet was already filled. My jaw dropped. Racks of clothes, dresses, sweaters, jeans, blouses, all in my size. A row of shoes, from sneakers to elegant heels. A collection of handbags on a shelf. It was a complete wardrobe, curated for a stranger. "For me, Mr. Moretti anticipated you would have need of some things," Leo explained from the doorway, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "Your measurements were estimated from hotel security footage. Any items that do not fit will be replaced tomorrow." Security footage. They had taken my measurements from a grainy video of me sneaking into a hotel. The level of efficiency, the casual invasion of privacy, was staggering. I walked over to a rack of sweaters and touched the sleeve of one. It was cashmere, softer than anything I had ever felt. This one sweater probably cost more than my month's rent. I felt a wave of dizziness. It was too much. The fear, the luxury, the utter strangeness of it all. "There is a bathroom through there," Leo continued, his voice pulling me from my daze. "A meal has been arranged for you in the morning. Someone will be here to wake you. Do you require anything else?" "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "Thank you." He gave a short, formal nod. "Good night, Miss Vance." He pulled the door shut, the click of the latch sounding unnervingly final. I was alone. I walked over to the massive window and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The city was a distant, glittering abstraction. My life was down there somewhere, but it felt a million miles away. This room, this house, was my new reality. A gilded cage, just as I'd thought. But the bars were made of cashmere and the view was spectacular. I took a long hot shower in the rainfall shower, washing away the grime of my old life. I dried myself with a towel that was impossibly thick and soft, and put on a pair of silk pajamas that had been laid out on the bed. I felt like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. I climbed into the bed, the sheets cool and smooth against my skin. I should have been terrified, unable to sleep. But the combination of emotional whiplash, a full stomach, and the sheer physical comfort of the bed was like a powerful sedative. As I drifted off to sleep, my last conscious thought was of Dante's dark, possessive eyes. I was his now, and I had no idea what that meant. I woke to the soft chime of a bell. For a moment, I was disoriented. my mind still half submerged in a dreamless sleep. The morning light was filtering through the massive windows, bathing the room in a gentle gray glow. An older woman with kind eyes and hair pulled back in a neat bun stood by my bed, holding a small silver bell. She wore a simple black dress and a white apron. "Good morning, miss," she said, her voice soft and accented. "My name is Sophia. Mr. Moretti asked me to wake you. Breakfast is ready for you downstairs when you are." She spoke with a gentle deference that made me uncomfortable. I was used to being invisible, not waited on. "Thank you, Sophia," I mumbled, sitting up. The silk pajamas felt alien against my skin in the light of day. Sophia gave a small smile and a nod before slipping silently out of the room. I dressed in a pair of soft jeans and a gray cashmere sweater from the magical closet, the clothes feeling both luxurious and like a costume. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The haunted, hollowed-out girl from yesterday was gone, replaced by someone who looked cared for. It was unsettling. Downstairs, the house was just as silent and imposing as it had been the night before. Sophia was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs and led me not to a grand dining room, but to a smaller, sunnier breakfast nook off a state-of-the-art kitchen. A place was set for one. A feast was laid out: fresh fruit, pastries, eggs, coffee. I ate, feeling a profound sense of dislocation. This was a life of effortless luxury, a world away from my frantic, hand-to-mouth existence. Dante was nowhere to be seen. After I finished eating, I wandered through the downstairs level of the house. It was vast and empty. I found a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a home theater, and a gym that was better equipped than most professional facilities. There were no personal touches, no photographs, no clutter. It was the immaculate, impersonal home of a man who didn't seem to truly live in it. I spent the day in a state of anxious limbo, a ghost in a palace. I read a book from the library, but the words wouldn't stick. I tried to watch a movie, but I couldn't focus. Every creak of the house, every distant sound, made me jump. I was waiting for Dante. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. He didn't return until late that evening. I heard the sound of the SUVs in the driveway, and my heart leaped into my throat. I was sitting in the main living area, curled in the corner of a sofa, pretending to read. He walked in, looking just as he had the night before, a dark, imposing figure in a perfect suit. Leo was with him. Dante's eyes found me immediately. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand, and he looked tired. The formidable mask of control was still in place, but I could see the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes. He dismissed Leo with a curt nod and walked over to the armchair opposite me, sinking into it with a sigh that was almost inaudible. We sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the faint clink of ice in his glass. "Are you comfortable?" he asked finally, his voice a low rumble. "Yes," I answered quietly. "This house is incredible." "It's secure," he corrected me, his gaze intense. "That is its purpose." He took a long drink of his whiskey. "Leo retrieved your things." He gestured to a small box on a nearby table. "Textbooks, a laptop, some personal items. The rest of your apartment has been cleared out, the lease terminated. You have no more ties to that place." Just like that, my old life, erased with a phone call. I felt a strange mix of relief and loss. "And the debt?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Paid," he said simply. "All of it. It is no longer your concern." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, the glass cradled in his hands. He fixed me with that penetrating stare. "Which brings us to Mark Renshaw. My stomach clenched. What about him? He is a loose end, Dante said, his voice turning cold. A liability. One I intend to handle personally. I will not have his filth touching your life ever again. The venom in his voice when he spoke of Mark was startling. It was a deep, personal anger. What are you going to do to him? I asked, a tremor of fear in my voice. I despised Mark for what he'd done, but the thought of this man, with his casual power and capacity for violence, handling him, was terrifying. I am going to ensure he understands the consequences of his actions, Dante said, his voice dangerously soft. And I am going to make sure he disappears from your life. Permanently. He stood up, placing his empty glass on the table with a decisive click. He will be brought here, tonight. You will remain in your room. This is my business, not yours. Do you understand? I could only nod, my throat dry. He was going to bring Mark here, to this house. The thought was sickening. Dante seemed satisfied with my silent agreement. He walked over to the window, staring out into the darkness. Why? I finally managed to ask, the question that had been burning in my mind since I woke up. Why are you doing all of this for me? You don't even know me. He was silent for a long time, his back to me. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, stripped of its commanding edge, and filled with a raw, ancient pain. When I was 10 years old, he began, his voice low and strained, I watched my mother wither away. She was a beautiful woman, full of life. She fell in love with a man who promised her the world. He was charming, handsome, and weak. A gambler, like your Mark. He bled her dry, took every cent she had from my father's inheritance, then disappeared, leaving her with nothing but debts and a broken heart. He turned from the window, and in the dim light, I could see the anguish etched on his face. The mask was gone, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the 10-year-old boy who had been forced to watch his mother suffer. She worked herself to death trying to pay off his debts, he continued, his voice thick with a grief that was still fresh after all these years. She took any job she could find. She grew thin, frail. The light in her eyes went out. I was just a boy. I was powerless to help her. I stood by and watched, as the world, as he, destroyed her. She died when I was 12. An illness that, with proper care, she could have easily survived. But we had no money for doctors. He walked back toward me, his eyes boring into mine. They were filled with a fierce, burning resolve. I made a vow at her grave, he said, his voice a raw whisper. I vowed I would become so powerful that I would never be helpless again, and I vowed that I would never ever stand by and watch a good woman be destroyed by the weakness and selfishness of a man. When I found you in my suite last night, so desperate, so vulnerable, I saw her. I saw my mother, and I will not allow what happened to her to happen to you. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and shocking. It wasn't about me, not entirely. It was about her. I was a ghost, a proxy for a pain he had carried his entire life. His obsession, his possessiveness, his need to protect me, it all clicked into place. This powerful, dangerous man was still trying to save his mother. He seemed to realize how much he had revealed. The mask of control slammed back into place. His expression hardened. Go to your room, Elara, he said, his voice once again the voice of command. And do not come out until I tell you to. I fled. I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding with a confusing mix of fear and a strange, burgeoning empathy. He wasn't a monster. He was a man forged in tragedy, shaped by a vow made by a grieving child. It didn't make him any less dangerous, but it made him human. I locked myself in my room, but I couldn't block out the sounds. A few hours later, I heard the cars return. I heard muffled voices from downstairs, one of them sharp with command Dante's, and another, whining and pleading, "Mark." My stomach churned. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against the heavy wood, but I could only hear the low, indecipherable rumble of voices. It went on for what felt like an eternity. Then, silence, followed by the sound of a car speeding away. I stayed by the door, trembling, for a long time. Eventually, I heard footsteps ascending the stairs. They stopped outside my door. A soft knock. "Alara." It was Dante. I opened the door. He was standing there, his suit jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up to his forearms. There was a small, bloody cut across his knuckles on his right hand. My eyes fixed on it. "It is done," he said simply. "He is gone. He will not be returning. A trust has been established to clear your name from any of his outstanding financial entanglements. You are free of him. You hurt him," I whispered, looking from his knuckles to his face. "He will heal," Dante said, his voice cold and dismissive. "He is fortunate that is all I did. He now has a very powerful motivation to start a new life elsewhere." He looked down at his hand, then back at me. "The matter is closed." But as he spoke, I saw a flicker of movement down the long hallway behind him, a shadow detaching itself from another shadow. A man, dressed in black, holding something that glinted in the dim light. My blood ran cold. It wasn't one of Dante's men. His men were downstairs. This man was an intruder. "Dante!" I screamed, my voice raw with terror. Dante's reaction was instantaneous. He didn't even turn. He shoved me back into the room with one powerful arm, spinning to face the threat, shielding me with his own body. The hallway erupted in chaos. The intruder lunged, and I saw the glint of a knife. At the same time, Leo appeared from the top of the stairs, a gun in his hand, roaring a command. It was over in seconds, a blur of motion. Dante moved with a lethal grace I couldn't have imagined, deflecting the knife arm and landing a brutal, disabling blow to the intruder. Almost simultaneously, there was a muffled crack from Leo's weapon, and another man, who I hadn't even seen, crumpled in the shadows near the staircase. Silence descended, thick and absolute, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. Leo was checking on the downed man, while Dante stood over the one he had subdued, his chest heaving. "Petrov's men," Leo grunted, his voice tight. With fury, they must have bypassed the perimeter sensors during the commotion with Renshaw. Dante turned back to me, his eyes blazing. He stalked into the room, kicking the door shut behind him. He grabbed my arms, his grip bruising, and his eyes scanned me from head to toe, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice a harsh growl. "No," I choked out, shaking my head. "I'm fine." He pulled me against him, his arms wrapping around me in a crushing embrace. I could feel the frantic, heavy beat of his heart against my chest. He was trembling, not with fear, but with a white-hot, violent rage. He buried his face in my hair, his breath hot against my neck. "They came for you," he rasped, his voice raw. "They think you are my weakness. They came into my home to take you from me." The reality of my situation slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. The gilded cage had become a fortress, and the fortress had been breached. The danger wasn't just about Mark anymore. By being with Dante, I had become a target. His world, with its unseen enemies and casual violence, was now my world. The abstract threat had become terrifyingly real. He held me for a long time, his body a rigid wall of protective fury. The security of the house, which had felt so absolute, was a fragile illusion. The only thing keeping me safe was the dangerous man holding me in his arms, and in that moment, huddled against his chest, feeling the violent tremor of his rage, I wasn't scared of him anymore. I was terrified of what lay outside his protection. He had told me he would keep me safe, and he had just proven how necessary that promise was. He finally released me, though he kept his hands on my shoulders, holding me at arm's length. His eyes, dark and turbulent, searched my face. "You see now," he said, his voice low and intense. "You see why you cannot leave. Out there you are a target. In here, with me, you are safe. This is the only place you are safe." The 40 place. Last vestiges of my defiance crumbled. He was right. There was no going back to my old life. It was gone. And even if I could, it was now tainted with a danger I could never face alone. My choice had been made for me the moment Petrov's man stepped out of the shadows. My nursing instincts, buried under layers of fear, suddenly surfaced. My gaze dropped to the cut on his knuckles, which was still sluggishly bleeding. "Your hand," I whispered. He glanced down at it as if noticing it for the first time. "It's nothing. Let me clean it," I insisted, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. It was something I could do, a small way to reclaim a piece of myself in the midst of this chaos. I gently took his much larger hand in mine and led him to the pristine white bathroom. I sat him down on the edge of the marble tub and opened the medicine cabinet, relieved to find a fully stocked first aid kit. My hands were still trembling, but the familiar routine of cleaning a wound grounded me. I worked in silence, dabbing his knuckles with an antiseptic wipe. He didn't flinch, but he watched my every move, his intense gaze following the movement of my hands. The air in the small room was thick with an unspoken tension. We were so close, the silence amplifying the sound of our breathing. This act of care was a strange island of intimacy in a sea of violence and fear. As I carefully applied a bandage, my fingers brushed against his skin. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my arm. I looked up, startled, and my eyes met his. The fury was gone, replaced by something deeper, darker, and infinitely more complex. It was a raw, naked emotion that stole the breath from my lungs. It was hunger. It was possession. It was a longing so profound it seemed to ache in the air between us. He lifted his other hand, his uninjured one, and gently cupped my jaw. His thumb traced the line of my cheekbone, his touch surprisingly soft. "Alara," he murmured, his voice a rough, broken whisper. The sound of my own name on his lips was a caress. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I was caught in the gravitational pull of his gaze, a willing captive. When his lips finally met mine, it wasn't gentle. It was a collision, a desperate claiming. The kiss was hard, demanding, steeped in the adrenaline and terror of the last hour. It was the kiss of a man who had almost lost something he hadn't even realized he treasured. It was fierce and possessive, a brand of ownership on my very soul. But underneath the raw power, there was a current of something else, a desperate, aching vulnerability. The ghost of the 10-year-old boy who had lost everything. I felt my own fear melting away, replaced by a surge of an emotion I couldn't name. I kissed him back, my hands coming up to tangle in his thick, dark hair. I met his desperate intensity with my own, a silent acknowledgement of the violent, terrifying world he had dragged me into, and a silent promise that I was no longer fighting it. When he finally broke the kiss, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His chest rose and fell in deep, ragged breaths. "I will not lose you," he vowed, the words a guttural promise torn from the depths of his soul. "I will burn this city to the ground before I let anyone touch you." And I believed him. In the sterile white of the bathroom, with the smell of antiseptic in the air, and the faint echo of violence still ringing in my ears, the last of my barriers crumbled. I had surrendered. Not to the fear, not to the luxury, but to the man. The broken, dangerous, fiercely protective man who was determined to be my savior, whether I wanted him to be or not. And the most terrifying part was, I was starting to think I did. The following morning, the house was a hive of quiet, intense activity. The number of grim-faced men in suits had doubled. They moved with a silent, purposeful energy, checking security, panels, patrolling the grounds, their presence a constant, visible reminder of the previous night's breach. The fortress was being fortified. I saw Leo speaking into a wrist-mounted communication device, his expression harder than I'd ever seen it. Dante's world was at war, and I was the reason. Dante himself was a storm of controlled fury. He was in his study, a room I hadn't seen before, all dark wood and leather. The door was ajar, and I saw him pacing behind a massive desk, snapping orders into his phone in rapid, clipped Italian. He was a general commanding his troops, and his voice was cold steel. The vulnerability I had witnessed last night was gone, locked away behind a wall of ruthless authority. He was protecting his territory, and I was the most valuable treasure within it. I felt like a ghost, drifting through the tense atmosphere of the house. Sophia served me breakfast with her usual quiet grace, but her kind eyes were clouded with worry. The entire household was on edge. The air was thick with it. I retreated to the library, the one room that felt like a sanctuary, and tried to lose myself in a book. But the words were just black marks on a page. My mind kept replaying the kiss, the feel of his lips on mine, the raw promise in his voice. Late in the afternoon, Dante found me there. He stood in the doorway, watching me for a moment before I noticed him. He had changed out of his suit into a simple black Henley and dark trousers. The casual clothes made him seem younger, more approachable, but the intensity in his eyes was unchanged. "The threat has been dealt with," he said, his voice calm and even. The war was over already. It had been swift and decisive. I didn't dare ask for details. I didn't want to know what "dealt with" entailed in his world. "The security of this house has been tripled. It will not happen again." I simply nodded, closing my book. He walked into the room and came to stand in front of the chair where I was sitting. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable. "Last night," he began, his voice dropping lower, "you were given no choice. You were trapped by circumstance. But the circumstances have now changed." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim, platinum credit card and a car key. He placed them on the small table beside me. "The immediate danger from the Petrovs is gone," he stated, his voice flat. "Mark Renshaw is a ghost. Your debts are cleared. This card is linked to a private account in your name. There is enough money in it for you to start a new life anywhere in the world. The car in the garage is yours. It's registered, insured, and has a full tank of gas. You are, for all intents and purposes, free." I stared at the card and the key, my heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. This was it, the choice he had spoken of. The gilded cage door was standing wide open. "You can walk out of this house right now, Ilara," he said, his eyes never leaving my face, searching for my reaction. "No one will stop you. You can disappear. I will not come looking for you. You can have the life you were trying to build before all of this happened. A normal life." The words hung in the air, A genuine offer. A clean break. Everything I thought I wanted just 2 days ago. A life free of fear, free of dangerous men and their bloody vendettas. A life where I could be a normal nursing student, where my biggest worry was a final exam. It was all there, embodied in that small piece of plastic and metal. But as I looked at it, I didn't feel relief. I felt a hollow, aching dread. The thought of walking out that door, of leaving this house, of leaving him, was terrifying. The normal life he was offering felt empty and pale. It also felt terrifyingly unsafe. He had neutralized the immediate threat, but he had opened my eyes to a world of predators I never knew existed. Out there, alone, I would always be looking over my shoulder. In here, I had him. I thought of his confession about his mother. I thought of the protective fury in his eyes when he thought I was in danger. I thought of the desperate, possessive heat of his kiss. He was a storm, a force of nature, a dangerous and broken man, but he had made me feel safer than I had ever felt in my life. I looked up from the credit card and met his gaze. His eyes were carefully guarded, but I could see the tension in the set of his jaw, the rigid control in his posture. He was bracing himself for my departure. He, who controlled everything and everyone, was giving me complete control over his one vulnerability, the hope he had invested in me. He was offering me freedom, but what he was really doing was laying his heart at my feet, terrified I would crush it and walk away. Slowly, deliberately, I reached out and pushed the credit card and the key back across the table toward him. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. A flicker of something disbelief, hope crossed his face before he masked it. "You don't want the money?" "I don't want to leave," I clarified, my gaze unwavering. "My old life is gone. You said it yourself. There's nothing for me out there. Here." I hesitated, searching for the right words. "Here, I'm safe. With you." I stood up, closing the distance between us until I was standing directly in front of him. I was dwarfed by his size, but for the first time, I didn't feel intimidated. I felt right. I tentatively reached out and placed my hand on his chest, right over his heart. I could feel its steady, powerful beat beneath my palm. "This is a conscious choice, Dante," I whispered, using his first name for the first time in a way that felt intimate, not formal. "I am choosing to stay. I am choosing you." The carefully constructed walls around him seemed to visibly crumble. A shudder went through his powerful frame, and a look of profound, staggering relief washed over his features. He covered my hand with his own, pressing it tighter against his chest. His eyes, so often cold and guarded, were now blazing with a raw, unguarded emotion that made my own heart ache. "Alara," he breathed, his voice thick. He lowered his head and captured my lips in a kiss that was nothing like the one before. There was no desperation, no violence. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated reverence. It was slow, deep, and breathtakingly tender. It was a kiss that sealed a pact, a promise. It was the end of one life and the true beginning of another. When he pulled away, he didn't let me go. He wrapped his arms around my waist and lifted me as if I weighed nothing, seating me on the edge of the large wooden desk. He stood between my legs, his hands framing my face, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. "If you stay," he said, his voice low and serious, "there are no more half measures. You will not be a guest in my house. You will be its queen. You will be my wife." It wasn't a question. It was a declaration of intent, a statement of fact. The word wife should have sent me running for the hills. It was too much, too fast, but it felt inevitable. It felt right. It was the final, binding clause in the contract I had just willingly signed. "Okay," I whispered, the single word holding the weight of my entire future. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his severe features. It was the first time I had ever seen him truly smile, and it was devastatingly handsome. It lit him up from the inside, chasing away the last of the shadows. "Okay," he repeated, his voice filled with a quiet joy that I knew was a rare and precious thing for him. He leaned in and kissed me again, a soft, promising kiss. Then he pulled back slightly, his expression turning serious again, though the warmth remained in his eyes. He reached into the pocket of his trousers and pulled out something small. He opened his palm to reveal an antique locket, a beautiful ornate piece of silver and rose gold, hanging from a delicate chain. "This was my mother's," he said, his voice soft with reverence. "It was the only thing of value she had left when she died, the only thing that man didn't take from her. I have kept it all these years." He unclasped the chain, and with surprising gentleness for such large hands, he fastened it around my neck. The cool metal settled against my skin, a tangible weight, a piece of his past entrusted to my care. I looked down at it, my fingers tracing the intricate floral design. "This house was just a fortress," he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. "A place to keep the world out. It was never a home." "You," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you make it a home." Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of overwhelming, unexpected happiness. This terrifying, powerful man, who commanded a criminal empire and dealt in violence, had just handed me the broken pieces of his heart and trusted me to hold them. I wrapped my arms around his neck and pulled him close, burying my face in the crook of his neck, breathing in his familiar scent of cedar and safety. He held me tightly, his strong arms a secure fortress around me. We stood there for a long time, wrapped in the quiet of the library, the chaos of his world held at bay, outside the walls. Later that evening, he took me out onto the large terrace that overlooked the city. The night was clear, and the city lights glittered below us like a fallen constellation. A cool breeze stirred the air, but I felt nothing but warmth, wrapped in his arms from behind, my back pressed against his chest. "Look at it," he murmured, his chin resting on the top of my head. "From up here, it looks so peaceful, but we know what it really is. A jungle, full of predators." I leaned back against him, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "I'm not afraid of predators anymore," I said softly. "I have my own," he chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through me. He tightened his hold, his embrace a promise of absolute protection. "Always," he vowed. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the distant, glittering world that I had escaped from. I had crashed the wrong wedding suite, a desperate girl looking for a meal. I had woken up in the arms of a man they called a monster, a mafia boss who never touched a woman twice. But they were wrong. He wasn't a monster. He was a king, and he had just made me his queen. My life of fear and instability was over, replaced by a future I could never have imagined. It would be a dangerous life, a life lived on the edge of a knife, but it would be our life, and for the first time since I could remember, I felt like I was finally, truly home.